Hello and welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage, Wednesday night, July 3rd, 2024. That's my timestamp for years in the future when I watch this video. I came back from pressure washing 2 boats today to meet a guy who was going to drop off a Turbo 400. He's not going to make it, so I decided I'll talk to you. I am on the transmission forums pretty much daily, reading the questions and comments, and very often, daily, the same questions get asked. It would be nice if you could answer them once and they went away. They will never go away, but let's talk about them anyway. The most popular question ever asked is, what type of transmission fluid and how much? Well, giving you my opinion, which this video will contain my opinions. There's no way around that. The transmission probably doesn't care what type of fluid it has in it. A Turbo 400 with Dextron 3 in it will perform just fine. That's my choice most of the time, or some low viscosity tractor fluid, or maybe a combination of Dextron 3 and tractor fluid. That's my go-to. It's cheap. More important than the type of fluid is probably how often you're changing it, and that's going to depend on what you're doing with the transmission. If you have to use the trans brake for extended periods, trying to spool a big turbo perhaps, you need to be changing that fluid probably every time you come back from going to the racetrack. If you're just leaving off a foot brake or using the trans brake as the tree's coming down, maybe you should think about changing your fluid as often as you change your engine oil. You can obviously tell by the color. If it starts to change color, you probably waited too long. But that could easily happen in one day at the track, depending on how much abuse you're giving it, how much heat you're creating. And how much, any Turbo 400 shallow pan or deep, you're going to use a minimum of 4 quarts every time you take the pan off. And with a deep pan, probably 5 or 6, just to make it move again. The comment that I like the most, I read that a very wise man said you'd be much better off to overfill the transmission and let it puke out the vent till it found its own level than to run it low on oil. Which segues right into 2 of our next subjects. 1, doesn't matter what order we take them, your dipstick. This particular style is a very bad choice. It belongs in the trash can. It's a fire waiting to happen. Why? This end has 2 O-rings and it just sits in the case. This end bolts to your firewall. If you have motor mounts that flex, if you're not solid mounted, and probably most of them are not, eventually this is going to wiggle right out of the pan if the end doesn't fall off first. This is brand new. It is an absolute piece of garbage. But if you decide that you must have one of these, at least get the one that bolts through the pan with a nut. Might be a quick disconnect. That's better. However, tests have proven every time you pull the dipstick out and push it back in, you might get a different reading. And with all dipsticks, you need to calibrate it when it's new. So you need to install it with the pan off, and the full mark should be even, let's say the gasket or the potting line between the pan and the case. That is your full mark when hot. You need to check it several times. I like to check it until it reads the same on both sides of the dipstick. And I won't be checking it with this piece of junk. I like a metal tube with a locking stick. NHRA approved. It doesn't need an adapter for the funnel. You don't have to put holes in your firewall. I've said this many times. I never had a prop. This was given to me as a gift because the guy knows I hate them. It's just a fire waiting to happen. You got one of these, you made a bad choice. Hopefully it doesn't catch you. So, the vent. You can see this is a stock nylon vent, just about 1975 and newer. Where's this pointing? You probably have an exhaust pipe over here. In 7405 and up, there was a cat converter over here. What do you think happens when you puke fluid out of the vent? Probably going to have a fire. That's why I drill and tap it and either put a 1/4 inch push connect fitting with a nylon tube. At minimum, run it back or out of the way from the exhaust or anything that's going to catch fire if it decides to burp. I prefer a catch can. Some people like them up high that squirt into the bottom so it drains back down into the transmission. That's fine. Or catch it underneath, but at minimum, get the vent away from the exhaust. There's pressurized fluid on the pump gasket right here. Your vent's right here. I've seen pressurized fluid from the top fitting make it out. The returning fluid make it back out because there was an imperfection on the back side of the pump which tore the gasket or held it away from the case, and it was pumping pressurized fluid out the vent. That would make a mess. I recently saw where combining both these, the dipstick and the vent, the guy had an AN fitting, the case was drilled and tapped, had an AN fitting, but they'd clamped a rubber hose over the AN fitting. Okay, at least an attempt was made to get the fluid out of the way, but when they bolted it in the car, the shifter cable kinked off the vent. Went for a road test, went to check his fluid. When he popped the dipstick, it came out under pressure onto the exhaust and caught fire. So there's a lot to be learned right there. So two very important and inexpensive ways to go bad. A good metal dipstick with a locking stick, metal tube locking stick, is around $35 to $40 everywhere, which is less money than that thing. Now let's go inside the transmission. There's quite a bit of confusion, and I recently fixed a Turbo 400 that the snap rings were installed in the wrong spots. There's 3 big snap rings, all about the same size, all go in the same area. So to identify them, the thinnest one, while it looks like a snap ring, GM calls it a fretting ring. In the early Turbo 400s, this lug right here was thicker, coincidentally this much thicker. So when the center support sat down in the case, it didn't have one of these. Nowadays, from about, I don't know, late 60s on up, they made a fretting ring, which goes in the case first. This is the first big snap ring you put in there. The center support sits on top of it. The idea, even though the center support was bolted down, that they were seeing some wear, probably when the case grows and shrinks, with heat. Whatever reason, they figure these lugs were wearing out the bore of the case, the lugs. So the fretting ring is very thin. You can measure the lug. There's only 2 different size center supports, and the thinner one takes the fretting ring. You'll know the difference. They won't go together with the thick one in a fretting ring. It's around 330 thousandths for the thin one, around 370 for the thick one. Look it up in your book. I'm just pulling that number right out of thin air, but I'm pretty sure I'm close to being right. On top of the center support gets the beveled snap ring. The bevel faces up toward the pump. You're looking at the bevel. It's going to sit right here. That and the bolt that comes up above the valve body hold the center support into the case. That's where the transmission I just fixed, where things went wrong. They put the intermediate snap ring where the beveled snap ring goes, and with the bolt, the center support didn't go anywhere, but on the intermediate clutches, it had the beveled snap ring. It popped out, forcing this snap ring to fail because the piston was over traveling. All the intermediate clutches slammed into the beautiful aluminum drum that it had, 36 element, and that just made a mess out of everything. Simple mistake. This is a stock intermediate snap ring. You want to throw this away unless you're building, even if you're building a stock street transmission, spend a few dollars and get the heavy duty snap ring. You can see the difference. Much better. And There's two types of case savers, at least two. There's more than two. To make up for the void in the case is a lack of lugs halfway around, well, a third of the way around the center support and the intermediate clutches. You want to support that with a case saver. One style will allow you to keep the front band. The other style uses the pinhole where the band used to hook to bolt through the case. That's the one I prefer if you don't need the front band. Again, the front band is only for engine braking in manual second. Back to the fluid for a minute. There's lots of opinions. You're welcome to yours. Whatever makes you feel good, go ahead and dump it in there. Me, I'm going to go for the most inexpensive stuff because I'm going to change it very often. I have never seen a whole lot of benefits to having really expensive oil, and I'm okay with maybe a semi-synthetic, maybe a full synthetic in a racing transmission. It might be too slippery. It'll work, but is it the best application for a synthetic fluid? I don't know. Lots of people will debate that. I'm not an oilologist, but I do work on transmissions, and I've seen inside quite a few. I am definitely not a Type F fan, mostly because I worked on stock Fords that had Type F from the factory, and they would varnish up, smell bad. You drop the pan, the transmission wouldn't move anymore when you put fresh fluid in it. I don't like the smell of it, the feel of it. I can always tell when a transmission comes in and has a derivative of Type F. It's gross. But anyway, that's it for tonight. Hope you got something out of this video, and enjoy the 4th of July and all that it means tomorrow.